one another more clearly and openly and fully, and to love one another. And so I'm delighted to have Amy Kerr-Jung and Shari, DeCarlo with us. Amy has been a member of St. Paul's, although she lives further away now and so isn't able to attend. And both Amy and Shari now run a company, a consulting company called Neo Advocates, which consults with parents and advocates for parents who have special needs. And Shari has experience with children, her own children who have disabilities, and she's also certified by the Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates and has done a lot of advising and consulting over the years. Amy also has neurodiverse children and has advocated for them and learned a lot through that, and helps parents to find their own path forward with their own children. And she has 25 years of educational experience and is an Ohio Supreme Court trained mediator, child and parent coach, and community educator. So I don't want to take another moment of their valuable time, and so welcome.
No one has ever said that to me. All right. I'll talk into this thing. Is this okay?
Yes.
I'm gonna blow your ears out.
Grab them.
Oh, I might do karaoke if I grab them. Dangerous. So I'm Amy. I'm Shari.
Nice to meet you.
We both have, our biggest thing is that we're parents. And my youngest over there is actually a self-advocate with some neurodiversity. So she might very well speak up. Shari's kids didn't wake up this morning. Tell them a little bit about your...
So I have two daughters, one who has fewer needs, and my other daughter, we did not expect her to live. We were 3 months in the NICU with her. Now she is 19. She graduated from high school. She has short-term auditory, she has short-term auditory memory loss, which if you think about an older person you know who might have memory loss, it looks pretty much the same. So we have had to adjust our lives, and we have found that she's welcome everywhere she goes. And I think that's what we want to talk about today.
Yes. Our kids are our reason. We call them our reason. We were parent mentors together. And I see my EFM friends. There's my EFM friends. They were really very much part of the discernment process. And all you Episcopalians know what discernment means. We're all discerning our ministry, right? And for me, that really, EFM was that foundational place where I was able to discern that my ministry lay in the area of disability and inclusion. And so I became a parent mentor, and so did Shari, where we helped families in our communities navigate the special education process, which if anyone has had any touch or touchstone with the special education process, you know it's a very complicated, sometimes it feels intentionally complicated and hard to navigate. So we've discovered our passion, I think, in navigating the special education process. Do you want to say anything more about our parent mentor journey?
I think we both came to a place as parent mentors where we felt like we wanted to be able to do more. For me, I wanted to be able to take a step forward and advocate rather than just mentor. And I think Amy felt the same. She needed a larger voice to be able to help more people. So that's why we started our organization. We do a lot of pro bono work because a lot of people who need that help can't afford that help. And we make sure that the people who come to us are empowered, they're learning, because we would like to work ourselves out of a job. Our goal is to be able to teach the parents, teach the families, teach the kids how to advocate for themselves and how to have their own voices.
Yeah, for sure. And then we can step in, and sometimes, I don't know, we should I do this?
Move that over.
I think we've all, no matter whether your child has a disability or not, whether or not we've all been in a position where we have felt powerless or unseen. Well, is there anyone who hasn't? I think, have you always felt empowered and powerful everywhere you've gone? No, so sometimes you really do need that third party, that person who's with you to just hold your hand. I always say I'm a professional best friend. Sometimes you just need someone to be there with you to help you navigate a system that's very complicated. So anyway, we're really about empowerment. So this just is what we just told you. We're dear friends and colleagues. It's the best to work with a friend. I have to tell you, when someone believes the same thing you do and can help you take that. She's my advocate a lot of the time.
She came to my daughter's meetings, it worked very well.
So we have to change the world together, okay? And so I think this last sentence is very important in terms of what I think advocacy can look like. And that is that it looks like bridge building. It looks like relationship building. You know, sometimes we get a bad rap as a profession because they sort of assume if you're an advocate, you have an advocate personality, you're going to come in swinging, right? You're going to come in ready to scream and yell and demand. But I think Shari and I believe very strongly that just like we do at St. Paul's, that we can build bridges with each other.
Please, Supreme Court training, what's that mean?
It just means,
Explain that.
sure. So a lot of times, the work of special education involves conflict. And we are often resolving conflicts within our team meetings or in our organizations. And so my background as a mediator, where I was trained by a Supreme Court module, basically, I have better skills now to mediate special education and disability conflicts that arise. Is that it?
Thank you.
Awesome. And please, we want it to be a discussion, so pipe up whenever you have a question or a comment. We do best with that kind of discussion. So we do believe building bridges among, I mean, it's certainly among people, among each other. And then also between places where there are power differentials, where you have a school system and a parent. There's a big power differential there, right? One person has all the control, one person feels very powerless. So if we can build bridges of understanding, at least some stairs to move back and forth, I think we can get a lot further than if we just create more conflict and separate yourselves more. Do you want to say anything more about that?
I think you said it.
So we're hoping you come away today with some sense of what self-advocacy looks like, what community advocacy can look like. So as an institution, how can St. Paul's look like an advocacy organization? Why does it matter? What's the point of inclusion? What does generosity of spirit mean to us here? What are some practical ways St. Paul's can address this concept of inclusion? And then what do you guys want to do after this discussion's over? What steps do you want to take? What are the practical steps? So I kind of want to just open the discussion up. Do you have any preconceived notions around neurodiversity or LGBTQ issues, which we bump into many times? Many times our families are from the LGBTQ community. We are often protecting and defending kids from that population because there's a lot of anxiety that comes with living a life in a neurotypical world.
There is I won't say causation, but there's a strong correlation between people who are neurodiverse and people who identify as LGBTQ. It is much higher than the general population. So these things go hand in hand.
And there are also there are rights like inclusive bathrooms, for example, that come into our work. We have to make sure we're protecting rights of people who need an inclusive medical plan. So that's very important. But are there any? Yes.
Can you address the issue of invisible disabilities and accommodation?
I'm glad you asked. That's something that's we all have kids. Our kids both, this child right here, you would never in a million years go, that's a kid with ADHD and dyslexia, and I see it. You can see it. And I did give her permission to talk about her neurodiversity before coming up here, by the way. Nora, do you want to respond to invisible disability?
About invisible disabilities.
You can come up and talk. She's a shill.
I just wanted to say that like people either with visible or invisible disabilities, we're really not any different. We are exactly the same, just with a little, we need more help. Everyone needs help at some point, right? So like, it's almost shamed a lot of the time, even within, like I've noticed that sometimes, even within the disabled community, there is shame there. Whether it's closeted, like, disability phobia, or like hatred towards yourself or other people with different disabilities. I've noticed that a lot in my own school, especially because I'm in the, but I think people just need to realize that no matter what your disability is, you have to be treated equally, and you can't always sugarcoat things, and you have to be able to talk to these people like they're people, and not like they're just like basically glass figures that you have to be super gentle with, because we're people, we can deal with things. And you might have to be more gentle considering what they've been through or what their disability is, but it's just important that that we treat people like people, no matter what.
I think you can sit down because Nora hasn't. Let her talk to you.
So, yeah, so to address your question, Sonora, because self-advocates actually are the wisest around disability, for sure. So that's why we are all about building self-advocates and building self-advocacy. Does that kind of answer your question around invisible disability? And I think a good percentage is invisible.
Yeah, both of my daughters and myself, I have MS. I think to look at me, you would not know that I have MS. Both of my daughters look typical, whatever that is. And my youngest one is very far from typical. She'll look at you like she knows what you're saying and has no idea what you're saying. It's hard when you meet someone who looks just like you look, and you start talking to them and you realize we need to adjust a little bit our form of communication or our patience or repeating a question. For my daughter, everything needs to be written down. I think in terms of invisible disability, just start by treating everyone with respect. Treat everyone with kindness, everyone you meet, because you don't know what they're going through. You don't know what their battles are. Just if we start with treating everyone how we would want to be treated and then adjust accordingly based on the needs of both people.
Yeah, I agree. Do you guys have any personal experiences with disability or anything that you found? Yes.
Our grandson has Down syndrome.
Uh-huh.
He's 19 now.
Congratulations. That's a wonderful neurodiversity, isn't it?
My daughter is very much engaged
Yes.
in that. I think it's going on what she's doing.
Wonderful.
It's,
Do you have a-
he's pretty low functioning.
Do you have a great, like, do you have a takeaway from your time with loving someone with Downs?
I think it's really a sense of it's accepting him as we do the other three grandchildren.
Yeah.
Not differentiating between that and not, trying to focus on the positive.
That's right.
And they, during COVID, it was a special time.
For sure.
They closed it, we're in California, they closed the school down, and then tried to teach these kids virtual.
Oh, yeah.
All this-
It was a nightmare. Yes, I think all teachers would agree that it was a nightmare and very
Parents
difficult. And very hard to teach students with neurodiversity. I think, nor was it harder to learn during COVID. Like, it was hard, I think, for everyone in that case.
They moved to Mississippi, where we're originally from, and they had a wonderful program and special needs. And so he's thriving in that environment.
It's wonderful.
My daughter's very much engaged in
That's awesome.
supporting it, so.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, yes, ma'am.
Oh,
Lois.
There's go first and then
Okay.
Becca.
I was a music education teacher at an elementary level and at the elementary level. With special need kids are mainstreamed into the regular classroom for the special music
teacher's voice, I don't usually use it. But it was challenging because I think the kids had to learn how to accept the person that was not learning at the same rate and not able to do some of the same things at the same time. As a teacher, I really made an effort to try to involve them in the full population. So I know how challenging, and like you said, when you've got the school system telling you this is the way it's got to be, it sometimes can be very challenging.
Yeah, thank you.
There is a gentleman.
And inclusion is, can you kind of come up, we're having a hard time.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Inclusion does move the needle. And idea-rich curriculum, so advocating for idea-rich environments for everyone, even if you don't think they can get it or understand it, idea-rich, language-rich curriculum for everyone is critical, so.
Hi. My question is on a slightly different area.
Sure.
I'd be curious to know how your advocacy whether there are any differences in your advocacy depending on whether we're talking about public schools and private schools, and how that might look.
Shari can feel that. Shari works with a lot of private.
I work with a lot of private schools, also public schools, and it is different because the laws are different. Public schools have to attend to something called IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And they are also having to follow the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. So there are very strict laws around public schools and what they have to do. Private schools do not have the same constraints unless they are taking federal funding. But for example, I work with a fantastic school that is a private Catholic school in Olmsted Falls. And we try to come to agreements and understanding, and we try to use their compassion and how they feel about what they should be doing, their morals, to compel them to do what they need to do for those students. Because the law is not compelling them, so we ask them to feel compelled by God. It's hard because they can just say no, and they do not have to listen to us, but we hope that they're doing the right thing and we try to guide them to do the right thing. Did that answer your question?
Okay, thank you.
Well, yeah.
You have the ADA guarantee that people with disabilities, but really, I've been in the hospital for 4 months, and the ADA is not working with the lawyers and things like that. It's just so weak. It's not powerful. How can you say it's guaranteed? You have the word up there, and the lawyers don't agree with that. Can you explain that?
You're so right, and that is why we exist. Because many times institutions do not comply with the ADA. So advocacy, we're one step before a lawyer, right? Because in many places and many times, we need to fight for those rights. This is a civil rights struggle right now. It is. Disability inclusion and disability rights continues to be a civil rights struggle because I promise you it's not being enacted in ways that it should be. In schools, where it is federally mandated, it is still often not being followed. So we are engaged in a civil rights struggle still to this day to give kids the right tools to thrive, to give adults the right to exist comfortably in all spaces. That's a fight still. So that's why we're here. That's why we exist. Yeah, Pete?
I retired a number of years ago as a guidance counselor. And it was at a time when a lot of special education was sort of blooming, and the rights, the rules. I absolutely applaud the work that you folks do as advocates. I saw it in IEP meetings when it would be the parents with the school, and I would be one of the administrators, be a special ed teacher, whoever. And the IEP meetings were different when we had the advocates sometimes the parents would start to bring them in once they were aware they could, and then actually our school system had hired somebody in that capacity because they don't have the emotional attachment of the parent.
That's right.
And they also have the recognition that the parent doesn't have to say, oh, well,
Right,
because they didn't know what their rights were.
that's right.
And I would hope that in the years since my retirement, that their awareness has increased dramatically.
Some.
But the role, my point is the role of people who are advocates, whether they're brought in by the parent or by the school, is huge. And thank you.
Well, thank you. We think so. Thank you very much, Pete. I think, oh, Pat, go ahead. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Thank you for making this a discussion, guys. This is what we want.
I want to piggyback onto what Chuck said. I don't often do that by just following him willy-nilly, but I do want to piggyback on what you're saying in terms of building bridges. And we've experienced mediation, and possibly many of you have in other venues besides hospitals or around ADA. You're working with the Supreme Court of Ohio. The deaf community has worked with the Supreme Court of Ohio. I think that there are other things to consider. We can go through a mediation process, but if that doesn't happen and the bridges are burned or haven't even been built in the first place, what a wonderful tool. There may be legal recourse, and there are venues and ways to engage in that. It's a gut-wrenching process. Often people with disabilities and people who are disempowered don't have the funding or the wherewithal to know how to wend their way through a legal system, which is my next plug for GCC. Get involved with your politicians. It is gut-wrenching. It takes a lot of time and effort, a lot of work. And I loved what you said about the fact of the spiritual and imploring people to look at, all right, you're not complying with ADA, but what is your heart telling you? You don't have to comply with ADA. And if you're refusing to comply, what is your heart and your spirit telling you to do? That's some of the things we've talked about in our negotiations, Chuck and I. ADA has been weakened politically. I don't want to get into that, but it has been disemboweled, for lack of a better word. The guts have been taken out of ADA. Politics, you find things changing. When our kids were little in school, in Oxford, and Jan went to Oxford too, I just realized, we were in the days of TTYs and no ADA. I mean, Chuck and I have lived through 50, and Chuck's lived through 93 years of fighting for people with disabilities and himself. We went from TTYs and the elementary school not wanting to put in a TTY, which is the machine that you type on and you read the words that go across. And if our daughter were sick or needed to communicate while I was out working and Chuck was being Mr. Mom at home, what would he do? They didn't want to pay for a TTY machine until we educated and told them what a TTY is. And here we are with the onset of ADA since 1990, and we're still educating. So I'm just, it's wonderful to be able to come to St. Paul's. We have interpreters, we have GCC, so get involved if you can. And participate. Thank you for being here and being in existence.
And nobody's been a better advocate than you and your family, for sure. So
I want to address that a little and the changes that we have seen. My mom is the oldest of 7, and her youngest brother has Down syndrome. And he was closer to my age than he was to my mother's age, and much of the time he lived with us, and I grew up with him. The struggle to have him attend school, he could read, he could write, he didn't understand money, but you don't need to understand money to go to school. They didn't want him. They wanted nothing to do with him. And now I have clients who have Down syndrome and are in the typical classroom with their typical peers almost the entire day. The change is remarkable when people know that that is their right and they push for it. It's very important to keep in mind that if you know your rights, you can make it happen. So,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Back here. You have a microphone?
Do you want to come?
I don't think it's that long, but it's
You have to go up front, sorry.
You can get through this far. We need an accommodation for a lot of.
You can walk faster than that, we know.
My question regards something at a different level than Down syndrome, but my daughter went through school with an IEP, and her main issue was written expression, and which involved speed of processing information. Here, now I'm doing it. So she had an IP, she had extra time, she was given the resources that she needed to succeed, and that went through college, and she still had resources and benefit, the time allowed, and then she graduated, and she probably picked the wrong field, but she loved communications, and she had a couple of jobs, but she didn't have enough time. They didn't give her enough time to do the work that she needed to do and to do it successfully. So is there anything, in the working field? Because a lot of times it doesn't stop when you graduate from.
Well, and it can feel like falling off a cliff when you're done with public education, or college does provide ADA supports. Most colleges do. But again, it's up to the school to determine.
And that leads into the self-advocacy in college.
For sure, and that's why this slide exists, is self-advocacy, but you are right, and that is why some of our work involves working with businesses as well. And I think, Kayla, does yours work involve business at all? Do you go to businesses to talk about disability? Because Kayla did a wonderful presentation last week, which we got to read up on, and I think so many of the things we're talking about dovetail right into what you talked about. But making sure that your workplaces are inclusive, that's also a service we offer, to go in and do 360 evaluations of businesses to make sure they're including everyone, because you're missing major talent when you are not including people with disability accommodations. You're missing out on, you want an autistic worker at your job to get every single data field filled in perfectly with not one mistake, but because the communication difficulty might throw you, you've missed an opportunity for a really amazing quantitative worker.
Want me to tell them about
Yeah.
Annie?
And yeah, tell about your child.
So I have a 19-year-old, and it's the one I've been speaking about. She has a job, and I will give all praise to Jersey Mike's subs. Jersey Mike's hires people with disabilities, and it's not busy work. It is intentional, where they find a job that this person will be good at. If you want an autistic person to chop your onions and portion your mushrooms and wrap your brownies, and they're going to be exactly the same way every time, hire an autistic person. Because that fine detail, this is what they excel at. She's so much better at that than I am. It's important to find things that are the strengths of people with disabilities, and hopefully they will speak for themselves like Nora does. Everybody's going to want to hire Nora, right? I would hire you. Eventually. We'll put you on payroll. So, talking about self-advocacy. This is people speaking for themselves, feeling empowered enough to speak for themselves. Feeling that in their community they are accepted and they can say, you know what, I can't get into this room. We need to make sure that there is a way for me to get my wheelchair into this room. Or I cannot hear or understand what you are saying. We need to make sure that we have a translator so that it's clear and everyone can participate. People sometimes have a hard time finding their voices. A lot of people who are in school have a self-advocacy goal, and we add those a lot to plans within schools. So the kids can find their own voices, so when they become adults, they can tell other people what they need. Is that's what? Okay.
Do you guys have any stories of self-advocacy for yourselves or people in your lives? Yes.
I'm reading this, and,
Sorry. We want everyone, we're accommodating everyone so everyone can hear.
I'm struck as I'm reading this how similar it is to I'm somebody with several invisible chronic illnesses, and in order to get diagnoses or not be gaslit, I've had to self-advocate strongly. And so I guess I feel some camaraderie, and I don't know how, in the whole neurodiversity, that's a new term, I think, and I'm not sure what all it encompasses, but it just makes me feel how strongly we all can relate to some aspects of this, and how many people are actually, I mean, who's normal? Nobody's normal. But I wanted to point out that I love these 4 points at the bottom. How can I help? Listen to people and believe them, I think, is so important. That their experience is real, and what they are trying to tell you is true to them. And then I like the last point too, don't offer help unless they ask for it. I just wanted to highlight how important those are.
That's so important. I learned this last lesson. We're not gurus or experts. We're always still learning. And I learned this from a dear friend who had 2 strokes, had an invisible medical disability, and he was struggling mightily with cutting his pancakes. Okay, struggling. And I just said, "Can I help you cut that? Do you want some help with that?" And he said, "Don't offer me help unless I ask you for it. I'm an adult. I'm 52 years old. I don't need you to help me unless I ask you for it. Because I'm an adult, I'm a full-fledged human being." Not that he was much kinder than that, but I took it too hard that, that's a lesson I had to learn. Because my heart hurt because it was clearly very hard for him. So my paternalism stepped in, and, I decided to take over. Sorry, go ahead.
With that in mind, for the 4 lines at the bottom, how do you square line 1 with line 4?
Well, this is how you can help, is know not to ask. This is how you can help. You can know this, educate yourself to know that giving people as much dignity, it's what my friend said, I deserve as much dignity as anyone else. So it's educating yourself to know this.
But isn't line 1 contradicting line 4?
No, I don't think so. I think it's the way you can help people with disabilities is to not offer help unless you're asked for help.
So the how I can help is more like a heading for those 3.
Sort of. I guess I'm just bad at PowerPoints. Maybe. I think my friend is pointing out that I suck at PowerPoints. Keith Kerr, my dad.
How I can help when you have been asked. Then, how can I help?
And I think also maybe it's, how can I help could also be said noticing. Just noticing and being present. Instead of asking that question, just noticing and being present.
But I think asking the question, how can I help, doesn't say, let me do this for you. I think that it's, I'm going to listen now. How can I help you? And if the answer is, I don't need any help, then that's what the answer is.
Yes.
And you don't.
That works well. So I guess I'm really good at PowerPoint.
I think it depends on the tone that it's at.
Yes, I know when my daughter was born, first thing he did, he had first to come around and have tests ears. And that just noticed she's hearing, or she had hearing problems or something like that. So that really scared a lot of people if the child had to be done. Now, how could you tell, I don't know how could you tell a child born that child would be disability, and the parents will find out early, probably not want to have that child. Probably give it away, yes. That bothers me.
Yes. I can understand why that.
Do they tell the child that your child, your boy or your girl, your daughter will be disabled? You may say that.
Like somehow you think there's a cultural belief that someone with a disability would be less than, unless, is that what you're saying?
Not one.
think he's asking if the medical professionals tell parents from the onset, your child may have a disability or will have a disability.
Right.
Mine did. My whole medical team, it was clear from the beginning.
But yeah, that's a very complicated, I don't know if I have the hours in the day to parse that, but it's complicated, isn't it? It's a very complicated question, and I would be upset too if I were you.
So my question goes back to the self-advocacy. We have a daughter who has a lot of invisible chronic illnesses like you, and she needs help. She wants help, but she's always been the shy, self-sufficient one. And so what she will say when I say, well, why didn't you ask for help on that? Well, I didn't want to burden you and Mom. I'm already enough of a burden on your life. I didn't want a burden to ask you to do that.
And isn't it sad that society has made her feel that way? The world really does that, and that's so important to hear that the world does sort of have a normative tendency, right? So people do feel like a burden or different or othered. And I think there is something to be said. It is more important with children. They may need, because they haven't built the self-advocacy skills that adults have, they may need more overt questioning. Do you need help with this? Or checking on their homework? Or, oh, I'm sorry, we have 5 minutes left only. But I honor and hear that. That is really a very profound thing to hear.
Well, that's what I'm playing up on, like you said at the end of the last one about, and your friend was obviously comfortable with who he was and what he needed and what he didn't need. And I think you addressed that you've got to also recognize that, that when you're asking them what kind of help maybe they really do need, but they don't know quite how to ask for it or feel that it's comfortable. So that's the education.
Yeah, and it's a fine balance, and we can mess it up. And the thing is, when you mess up, it's just like saying the wrong pronoun, right? Just say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I can correct myself. I'm sorry. I know we only have a few minutes. Here's the benefit of inclusion. Shari's going to talk about this.
Every person has value. Every single person in the world. You can learn something from every single person you meet. You can grow from learning from every single person you meet. They add value to the community. We learn when we include people with differences. If you can see a person with a difference as equal to you, you can see them as a friend, as a colleague, as your boss. It needs to be important that we see people, that they're not invisible. Assuming incompetence, as I was talking about my daughter, it's a missed opportunity. You find where the strengths lie and include that person because they will be incredibly valuable to you. Inclusive congregations have larger numbers. I think we all know that congregations are dwindling. Make sure that people know whether it's LGBTQ, whether it is we have wheelchair access for people, we have an interpreter for sign. Make sure that people know that they are included and they'll come to you because they're seeking to be included. Inclusive congregations are larger in numbers, they're also richer. They have so much more that they are learning and growing, and they then in turn have more to offer.
I think it's a mistake. There's a lot of paternalism in the disability community. There's a lot of assumption that because and as you said, what's normal? We're all a cocktail. I don't even like the term disability, to be honest with you, because we all have abilities. Let's just say, these are my abilities. These are my challenges. My challenges are nobody in my family will close a cupboard door, not one of them. So I have challenges of rage spiraling when that happens. We all have abilities. Mine is closing cupboard doors. That's my strong suit. We all have we're a cocktail. We're a recipe of different abilities and difficulties. So acknowledging that you're gonna learn something from anyone. This is what we learn at St. Paul's, that when we interact with each other, we're gonna grow together. That's why we have people in our lives and not nobody. We don't got not nobody in our, but, we become richer, I think, as a congregation, as a people, when we believe we can learn something from somebody. There is no law that is gonna make the church is not actually mandated to do anything about disability. Schools are, businesses are, churches aren't. So it's really, are we decent people or not? Who do we want to be as St. Paul's? Who do we want to be? And practicing this generosity of spirit. Assume the intrinsic value in each other. And don't be the one who's in your coffee clutch talking just to yourselves. When you see the person standing all by themselves, include them. You don't know what their diversity or neurodiversity is, but you can assume if you're reaching out that spiritual generosity to others, you're going to include. You may end up just including someone with a disability, because a lot of us have them. There is no law, but there's a spiritual pull to do what's right. And then this really calls back to Kayla's presentation about, we want to be called to belonging, not just including people, but we want a sense of belonging here. Embracing people, not just accepting. I don't like Autism Acceptance Month. I want to call it Autism Embracing Month. Let's embrace the wonderful things that happen because our brains don't all think the same way. Make the first move. Yeah. This is it. So that's it. I guess you're
obviously such a critical conversation that needs to continue and brings about such richness to our world when we can celebrate one another and enjoy all the diversity that God has created for us. And we do operate by the law of love, so that's what we're called to do. So thank you both so much again.